Hey, it's Mark. Welcome you back to Project Arbiter. I don't know for you guys, but I find one of the most satisfying things I can do as a compositor is to fully transform a source shot. And by saying fully transform, I don't necessarily mean I have to alter every pixel in the shot, but just really changing the feeling and look and dramatic effectiveness of the shot is one of the things I find most satisfying about being a compositor. So in this case, this was the beginning plate. Actually, if I line them up just on the first frame, you can see exactly what A versus B has going on here. Not the most complicated shot I've ever worked on, and it does incorporate some things that we've done already, although slightly different, and quite a few different ways you could go with it. So this is just one of them. But looking at the original, obviously the main thing that was wanted here was to get a more interesting sunset happening for this penultimate shot of the film. So it's dramatically an important one. That is the 22-minute version of Project Arbiter. And then we've also got a lot of modern California-looking buildings lurking the shot. And so those need to be removed. And finally, of course, I just threw in a bit of color correction to match something like what I'm seeing in the current output of this project. So let's get started. I have to admit, I get a strange joy out of treating every comp as if it's just a straight A over B, because you start to see really everything that is involved with compositing. So when you tell somebody, oh, I'm a compositor, and what I do is put the elements together to make the shot, and it just doesn't sound like much. Well, when you see a straight A over B in a case like this, you start to see that there is a little bit involved. Now, among the keying tools that I could use to just remove the sky, which is the most straightforward way to just get an A over B, I'm not going to use Luma key because, check it out, it's not even working in the bit depth that I want to be in. Let me switch to 16 here to begin with. So I get the little warning. Well, actually, it's okay. It's 16-bit compatible. But if you've heard me ride this hobby horse around before, it does not have any actual thresholding in the alpha based on the image. It's just a straight bitmap key. Let me just show you. So if I key out lighter and raise the threshold, what I get are little square edge pixels, bitmap pixels, and then any feathering that I do to that is just basically blurring it. So forget about that. I wish they would get rid of that one, and let's just take a look instead at extract. With the extract tool, I can actually, based on the histogram of the image, introduce some gradations into this edge. And you can see that this is still going to be kind of a challenging one here. Now, at the moment, the color correction and the color match is not happening at all. So that's going to help. But looking back at the original, the reason this is believable to the eye is that it's so blown out behind it. And here in this version, that's really not happening. So what do? Now I have to look at a color correction. We can just stay on this frame for the moment. I'm eventually going to have to track the sky in. But just on this frame, well, I can either match the foreground to the background or the background to the foreground. Okay. Let's try making the foreground match that beautiful sky. I'll go to levels, which is usually the first color correction tool any of us reaches for, and just get some more contrast happening in the darker levels, and maybe also here in the brighter levels as well. And I can see that I've got even more of an uphill battle now. Not totally buying that, even looking at the shot overall. And in fact, I don't think I want the shot to be that dark. So whether or not I just handled that right, Let me try the opposite. Anything I say here, you might try and have better luck than I do. So when I create a straw man argument like I just did and knock it down, feel free to go ahead and try that option and go further with it. So what if I bring the black levels, output black levels up, again, to match what I saw in that histogram before, but also what I'm seeing with my eye, where they're washed out. And if I blow out the sky levels to look more like the ones we had. Well, now I have a sky that better matches what I've got in the shot. And it has some more detail on it. It just doesn't look very nice. And obviously what I'm going to want to do is add a color correction to now bring the whole shot in line. So let's do it with levels again. And let's say it's just so hot in the sky that I'm going to bring it back down. That's not working too well. And the problem is that I've crushed those sky values. So where all the nice detail was before, it's now out. Now, again, because I went down this road of saying, let's match the sky to something that believably looks like it could be blowing out those trees like that, which I now have. And by the way, the instructions from the director were to position this sky, let's just take a look at it, so that it is sitting right below the horizon. I meant to turn off levels for the sky layer. So he wanted that sun orb to sit just below the horizon, so it's as if the sun has just gone down. And you can see it's actually a really pretty sky. So we want to get as much of that vividness into the sky as possible. Well, right now, we're having quite the opposite happen. Not so nice. Now, here's one thing we can do right away, and this is something some people out there might avoid doing, and that's just to boost the project to 32-bit. Notice there wasn't a big wait for that comp to happen, and instantly we snapped into a better looking sky. Let's take a look under the hood at what's happening there. I'll use the handy info panel, and I am in decimal mode. So by default, you might be in 8-bit, or in this case, by being in 32-bit, you would by default be in decimal mode. You could also interchange that with %. The point I'm really making here is you can choose. So even if you're working in confusing 16-bit values, you're not stuck with them. If you prefer 8-bit, we could look at those. I'm going to go with decimal. And so 1 in this case is full white. Now notice that red value right there is going above 1. And in fact, I have a few values poking their heads above. And if I take off the color correction, I have a lot of values going up above 1. So that's what was happening. Those values were getting crushed, again, by having brought this white value down. All those pixels in that part of the histogram are getting pushed to white. The great thing about doing that is what I've succeeded in doing is recreating something like the match that existed in the first shot. And by promoting it, I can bring back some of that. Now, I'm still not really happy when I zoom in here with how this looks. And I think the problem I have, well, it's twofold. And I have a couple of options. I don't like these edges, and I've done what I can with them. I could maybe do a little bit better, but basically they're pretty clumpy. If we look at the foreground again, just what we started with, it's not like they're a lot clumpier, they're a bit clumpier. And so maybe there's a little more I could do with this extract tool to just bring a bit more detail into them. But honestly, that's a bit better. It's still pretty clumpy. So one thing would be to just replace the foliage. Essentially take a matte painting approach and just replace out everything that's happening with that tree and everything that's happening over here. The benefit to that, which I can easily show you here, is that if I did that in 32-bit, or even in 16 if I didn't want to round trip, that blowing out occurs naturally. So as I really boost up the light, notice it gets more kind of clumped together, right? That's just a natural light effect. What I'm doing here is ramping just the exposure preview up and down to show you that in action. So by replacing in your own foliage, you could totally take control of it here in comp, and you could decide to what extent all that bleeding occurs. I'm not going to do that, partly because I didn't get those elements, and I'm trying to just do this in really the most effortless way possible and work with the elements I've got. So that means my backup approach is to look at what else I could do to make just this part of the shot work better. And what I'm seeing is there's just too much contrast happening. And I'd like to actually maybe soften just color-wise what's happening between that tree and that background. I'm not saying it's going to work or that it's what you want to do, but let's give it a try. So I'll duplicate these layers. Actually, yeah, can go ahead and duplicate them and just move them so they're sitting right above. And having done that, I'll rename this one Sky Overlay. So I'm going to effectively create a B over A over B comp. And it's going to be held out by the inverse of that alpha that I created. So starting with that. And then to get that to bleed into the background, I could mess with the extraction, but I don't think I'm going to do that. Let's take the existing matte and either reverse choke it. No, excuse me, just choke it. Choke the matte in, which is still pretty darn clumpy. Or actually blur it. Channel blur. Channel blur, not under channel, but under blur, channel blur. Alpha blurriness. And to get rid of this bleeding along the edges, I'll just repeat edge pixels. And I can go as far as I like. Let's just see what happens if I unsolo it. So what I like about what's happening here is it's just softening the apparent effect and increasing the feeling of bleeding without actually messing with the edges. So my eye is not quite so drawn to what was looking kind of wrong up there. Now, if I look at the shot as a whole, I like that effect of the orange coming over the horizon. And again, feel free to disagree with me on anything that I say I'm liking here, but this is where I'm taking the shot. And what I don't see is any of that happening in the foreground. So I could, of course, correct the foreground plate just to have a bit more of that. A really quick way to do it, again with the levels effect, is to maybe go into the red channel and pull up on the output red, raise the red blacks, and then lower the blue blacks to get some more yellow happening. And that brings it a little more in line. Another way I could do it is to actually get some of the original sky shot in here, lighting it. Now this is a little unorthodox, but I like what I see in this original shot. And the problem, of course, is there's some people and a house in here and some other stuff I don't like. But the basic setup of the shot is similar. There's this big broad sky, some rolling mountains, some foreground, background. So what if I were to, again, so let's actually work with this one right here. So I'll duplicate this. In fact, if I just duplicate this layer, it's gonna, no it didn't. If I duplicate both of them, at least they both get moved up above. Now looking at that one, soloing it for a moment. I'm going to invert that, so go back to the alpha matte. And then I'm just going to blur it like crazy. If I use fast blur, when I really crank up on this blur, actually I'm good to go either way. I'm not having an edge problem because this image is much larger than my current frame. And I haven't even talked about rescaling the sky or anything like that. Also an option. With this element, I can now say use an add mode, which works pretty nicely in 32-bit linear by default. And I can just dial it back. And what I like about that is there's a pretty natural feeling here of that sun illuminating that valley as much as I like. Now, I could have done the same thing with a ramp. So as I said, it's a little bit unorthodox. If I go too far with it, I get the sun kind of coming right through, although you could even make an argument that that right there looks pretty nice. Let's take a look at the whole shot now, and of course to do that, I'm just going to really quickly track in those skies, which I could have done earlier. Create a tracker null. And just to take this one step further, because we already kind of covered tracking in here, a good target in here could be just something right in these trees. And the reason being that the winds, it's not like there's crazy wind blowing or anything like that. You can see they're holding their shape pretty well. So for example, that right there should work fine. Let me close up this info panel, and target is correct because I created the null before I opened the tracker, so I'll just apply it. And now all of those skies should follow along with that. So just line them all up. Pick whip all of them to that tracker. And preview the shot. All right, that's interesting, if quite strong. And this guy's looking a bit nuclear around those trees. So I'm going to get rid of that mask holding out just that area up there. Whoa, I got rid of all of them. Let's just select this one and get rid of it. That's better, sort of. And then by dialing down the opacity here, I've got a good deal of control now over how much that sun and sky is really filling this frame. So again, if I push it really hard, like that, because I'm in 32-bit, I can pull back down on it. So that gives me a few variables to dial this in. And at this point, I'd like to focus now on getting rid of the buildings and houses. So create a new comp and call it 023 CP for clean plate. Now, I'm going to grab that same tracker, and I'm going to make quick work of this because I know you don't want to watch me roto, and so we're going to leave out things that really aren't that applicable. This time around, I'm going to do this without using the clone tool at all. You'll see. So that same tracker is really helpful. If I then create a solid, and the settings I've got here are already good. I had done this once before, and I made it a bit larger than comp size. So I started with comp size and then just went up in each value just so I can more than cover the frame, cover the camera move. Although there's not too much danger of that here because I'm just going to hold out a couple of areas. So I'll call this one Oops. Masks. It's dark lime green for some reason because I didn't select the color. And then just make a selection around the areas that I want to work on. I want this to be kind of, let me try this again. Just want to have a nice round mat around here. Yep, that's good. Something like that over there. Over on this side, one thing I can tell you from experience is that although the buildings and things I'm trying to get rid of extend into the trees, toward the end of the shot, not only does the truck drive through it, but there's this nice dust. And I think I'd like to keep that. So for now, I'm going to leave those and let everyone imagine that, in fact, maybe that's not so noticeable if we take care of these over here. So in other words, I'm saying the viewer's going to accept that those are rocks or something else over there that don't matter so much, and if we get rid of these regular patterns over here, we'll be good. Hook that up to the tracker and actually bring it down, and so now those are the areas that I'm going to be working on, just right there. If I invert it, just going to fill those in. Now, to narrow it down further, and again, this plate. Use the extract tool again. One thing about the extract tool is it is just working on luminance. You could have it work specifically on a single channel. Let's take a look. Red, green, blue. Not a ton of difference here, but I'm going to go ahead and work on blue because it seems to have a bit better contrast. And now my histogram reflects the change. So I'm just knocking out pretty liberally all signs in the foreground of that whiteness. And then I need the edge to come back. Want a bit of thresholding. That's not a bad place to start, let's just say. If I look at the alpha, the thing here is that this isn't so useful as a matte because right now there's black inside of white instead of black. But if I invert it, now I actually have just the holdout areas. Now they're white. And in fact, I think I'm going to want to tighten this up a little bit so I don't include that part. They're white, so I'm going to be using it as an inverted matte channel. So I can take this whole thing and pre-comp it and just make it building holdout. I don't know if that's the greatest name. I don't need to open the new comp. I just want the matte to be right here. These can go up in that comps folder, and then here comes the plate again. Not into that one, but this one. And now I can either hold out just those areas or just the inverse areas. So now I have some holes to fill in. Now, really quickly, what I want to do now is assess whether this is going to be just putting new information behind there, or it's going to be that plus a little bit of cloning. So I can bring in another mat, another plate. Let's call this one plate. Call this one fill. And with that fill layer, I can just move it around. Right off the bat, that's looking pretty promising. Now, I'm not going to want to just use that, and as the shot goes on For example, the truck driving through is probably going to cause some difficulty, but again, start with the simple result and then only make it more complicated as you need to. So for example, over here, can even create a region of interest just around this area. And that pattern that I'm seeing in there has to go. But that could be as simple as just getting more dark area like up here to go behind there. And then let's see what else about this might need some attention. The waving grass, it looks like I'm actually kind of getting away with right now. At least it doesn't draw my eye. I don't see a real disruption in the pattern there. I think the mat here could be a little softer, which is fine. I can even do that right here in the comp. And so already that one's pretty close, right? I kind of know what my task list is over on this side. And then over here, can I redraw this? No. Okay. I option clicked on that to reset it. Let's focus in on this side. Yeah, so a little piece of the truck is poking in there, and there's some other problems happening. But again, you know, the point was to start with something that was no-brainer easy and see how much I could get away with from that. And what I'm seeing is that it's basically going to work. I just need to keep fidgeting it around and patching it a little bit. So what I'll do is try moving that mat around a little bit on this side. In fact, what I can do right now is just split this. And this is going to be the process, is basically breaking this apart to the areas that work. So for example, what's working pretty well right now is this right here, other than softening that mat. So in fact, to begin with, I can just create a mask kind of broadly around that area. And that holds pretty well for the whole shot. And then for this one next door, I'll just call these all fill for now, but of course, may want to change that, get more specific about the labeling, depending on who else is going to end up looking at this. So here, I think I'd like, what, a darker area to fill that in. And I'm also going to need to loosen that mat a bit right there. So let's just take a look at that. In any case, you can kind of see already what the process is going to be. And since I'm trying to avoid fully rotoing this in front of you, I'm just sort of starting in here. Now, remember that if I want to adjust this while looking at that other comp, I can do that. So I can just lock this, go back here, and any adjustment I make in the subcomp is going to pass through. Might be easier though to just look at the mat. Because this is kind of difficult. In any case, this is going to get pretty quickly kind of tedious. So now what I'm going to do is actually skip ahead. And there, through the magic of time transport, is the current clean plate. let's take a look at what went into this, just really briefly. So I have a bunch of little holdout layers. Where we started, of course, was with just, excuse me, I held out the wrong layer there. Let's take a look at the plate, and then into that fill in just this back layer. That's just getting some basic hillsides in there. It's just a slight offset like we were doing before. Now then, to fill in the problems that that caused, here's a little bit better pass like I was doing with the grass right there. Up here is a hillside. Now for that, went ahead and actually locked that off in time and hooked it up to the track from the other shot. So it's just a still of the hillside. There is a little tree fill. Now I think actually, do I not have that in there? I actually got rid of that one. So in fact, that one doesn't apply. Then up here, I refilled just that tree. Again, just a still frame and just tracked it in. And that is pretty much that. In the mat itself, one thing that I did, excuse me, I keep clicking on the wrong thing. One thing that I did was add an adjustment layer just over this area of it to spread it out. And so that just is to soften and get rid of that lattice pattern that was happening over here. So if you really focus in on it, it's not perfect, but I'm going for that not particularly catching the eye. There could be more work over there. Then looking at the main assemble comp, what I have now, let's lock this color correct layer. So those of you who haven't grabbed Colorista free, do so, because for three-way color correcting in the app, it's pretty great. No selections in here, but just to have these wheels of color. And so this Colorista is giving it something like the feel that's in the movie. Now, check out the latitude I have by combining that with a curves control, which allows me both to determine how hot the highlights are and also pull down the gamma to maybe get more shadows in the foreground, and take a look at how I can set those against one another. The color correction I've got going here is very open interpretation. I was kind of messing around with something that would look like it fit in the film. If the sky is too hot, of course, I can also keep just dialing that in and out right here from my control before. So really, I've got many different ways to determine how this shot's going to look, and I can even pull back on the saturation a bit in here and maybe increase the contrast to get some more of the look that we've seen in other shots from this movie. So now I would even be pretty prepared for an over-the-shoulder, and I may go ahead and do just that with the director to get this exactly where they want to do it. The other way, of course, that I can go is just to deliver it without the color correction, and we'll know that they have the latitude to do everything that I'm doing there. The only caveat being that even in 16-bit, that sky will be blown out if I don't pull back on it. So, in fact, either I should deliver 32-bit TIFFs for this particular sequence, or since that's probably not what they want, I would probably need to flatten out this image quite a bit to give primary delivery. So any questions about that or anything else from this class, definitely hit me up in the forums, and I look forward to seeing you there.